Hello, Tar Heel Nation. We are back with another episode of UNC Hoops Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dan DeWitt, and we have a little bit of hope. We got a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully. Of course, we're talking about the start of college basketball. We've had a little bit of college football and gotten a little taste, and everybody is into it. NFL is back. The NBA playoffs going on. A lot going on, but of course, in this podcast, we are talking about college basketball and the hope, or at least the date we got yesterday for the start of college basketball. We're going to break it all down here. I got Blake from keepingitheel.com here to join me and to kind of break it down. Blake, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Dan. Pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you back. We're gonna jump in. I don't know how long this is. I guess it kind of depends how much we ramble about it and talk about it, because I'm sure we're both really excited about it. But we are talking about the start of college basketball. We get a date yesterday, November 25th, which is the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving. It's only pushing the start of college basketball back 15 days, 2 weeks. So it seems like it's a lot farther back, but it's really not that too far off, and to have a date in 2020, pretty exciting. What do you think about what they picked for their start date?
I'm just glad that there is a start date, and like you said, it's not too far off track from when the season normally starts. I have to wonder how it's going to impact scheduling a little bit. I don't know if that's going to cram some games together a little bit more, because there will still be those sort of early season tournaments. We now know that a number of those tournaments are likely to be played in the Orlando bubble. However, that won't affect North Carolina. What's going to affect North Carolina is that the Maui Invitation is likely going to be played in either Indianapolis or Asheville, North Carolina. So that's going to be a huge difference. If it's played in Asheville, you've got to like the Tar Heels' chances of winning that tournament going away. On the other hand, if it's in Indianapolis, the Hoosiers are slated to be in the tournament this year, and that's got to give them a little bit of a kind of a hometown advantage there. But regardless, I think it's great that college basketball is, at least at this point, going to happen. I think that it certainly will. And they've been very adamant about March Madness happening in March. So I think, with the NBA as successful as it's been, I think it's, a good idea to do the tournaments in the bubbles maybe. But, honestly, MLB is still going on and they're traveling. College football is going on. There's been some hurdles here and there. Obviously, we've seen one of those just in the last couple hours today, because the Tar Heels game this Saturday has been canceled with Charlotte because of COVID. But I think with everything coming back, I think college basketball is going to be able to do the same. And I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, so I want to get into a little bit of everything that you kind of talked there, and we'll try to piece it together here. I kind of wonder, is there a home court if it's played in Asheville or Indianapolis for the Hoosiers, or for us if there's no fans? We'll get to that stuff. Let's start with, kind of what you said with the tournament still happening, but how that affects scheduling. So what we've been told from yesterday's meeting, there was a D1 council meeting, and what we got from it was, instead of 31 regular season games, it's bumped down to 27 regular season games. But you can only schedule 24 regular season games if you're in one of those multi-team events or tournaments, like the Maui, or like all these early season tournaments. If there's 3 games in that tournament, you can have 25 regular season games if you're in a 2-game tournament, and you can only have 25 games if you're not in a tournament. I've also heard things like they want at least 4 non-conference games to be played. They did set a unusual, or at least a lot lower, of course, with the times going on, minimum game of 13. So you have to get 13 games in to technically qualify for the NCAA tournament. We'll see if that changes, if there's teams that don't get that far, if they're really just going to leave them out, or what they'll do with that. But let's see. Did I miss anything that you've heard?
No. And I would say that I am hoping that in some capacity we'll have fans at games. Obviously we want that to be safe. We don't want to, spread anything unnecessarily. But certainly there have been other venues that are finding ways to have fans, in arenas and stadiums. And I would hope that maybe by the end of November, we're able to see that with college basketball. Certainly if it's empty stadiums, there's not going to be much of an advantage for any team anywhere other than, the lack of travel. For instance, if North Carolina, if the Tar Heels are traveling just to Asheville, it's a very short trip. That might be beneficial to them, but, outside of that, probably not a whole lot of advantage. But, I think it really takes something away from the college game, even more so than professional sports when you don't have fans. So I'm hoping that at some point we can get to that and we can, do it, safely and responsibly and whatnot. But it's really in the college game, I think, where you really see a shift in the energy level and the advantage that one team has over another. If you do all these games just in a sort of an NCAA tournament style venue, except, where there's, fans from everywhere, this will be fans just none. And, I guess that gives every team the same competitive advantage, and you don't have, the hometown crowd helping you or the other side, hurting you and yelling at you and screaming things. But, I hope we have fans, but if we don't, at least we've got basketball.
It's true. And I guess, you kind of bring the other side of it is if there is fans, if it's in Asheville, more than likely all of them are going to be pretty much North Carolina fans because there's not going to be as much travel for other teams as far as fan bases go. So it could even make it more of an advantage if it's in Indy or if it's in Asheville. I didn't really think about that. And of course, we do have football going on. Some states allowing fans to come in, some not, a la North Carolina last week. And I don't know, does that have an effect one way or the other, I think, on basketball at all? Obviously, football being outside, we're going inside. NBA has let some family members come in, but they've pretty strict bubble that they have going on that I don't know that college basketball would list or adhere to like they do.
Yeah, obviously we're dealing with an indoor, atmosphere rather than outdoor, so that does have certain components to it that college football does not. And we're also dealing with much smaller venues. So, if you're talking about a 70,000, 80,000 seat arena or stadium in football, rather, you're talking about an arena in basketball that might be 15 or 20,000. So if you're only running those at, 15% capacity, I don't even know how much if that is even worth trying to funnel fans in to have 3,000 or 4,000 fans there. I don't know. I guess that's just something that we'll have to see. And then how is that determined? You've got boosters, you've got student section, you've got general admission. Like, how are those tickets divvied up in a place with, like North Carolina, where you've got all these boosters that have had these seats for decades? Are they going to be okay with only getting a certain allotment? Are they going to demand that they all get tickets? And are they even going to want to? Because a number of those boosters are of an older demographic. So I don't know what it does. There's so many questions and so many things that just don't have answers at this point. But, I think for sure it's going to be a different feel. And they obviously aren't going to have the same kind of money to do what the NBA has done with the bubble, where it's, just honestly, it's been a really cool atmosphere. Even though they haven't had fans, like, the video boards and the different sort of electronic things that they've had going on, the lighting and all that stuff, like the college venues are going to be very, very bland and very boring with no fans.
Right. Without being all in one place like the NBA, you just can't put the effort into, all of that stuff like the NBA has, let alone the money.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about how the pushback, even though it's only 15 days, affects scheduling. Of course, with the start of season being, I think it was November 11th or something like that, 9th, something along those lines. There was games scheduled at that time. So obviously those games can't be played and either have to be rescheduled or one of the 4 that you have to take off your schedule. And with that also goes, do the bigger schools, the Power 5 schools, does North Carolina, who has the money to test a lot more regularly, want to risk playing a mid-major or a low major who I've been reading tests like once a month, maybe every other week? Do we want to test that? So let's get into kind of the scheduling and how you think it's going to affect, do we see all the bigger conferences playing each other in some of these bubbles with maybe 1 or 2 of these other mid-major teams mixed in? Do they give some of the lower teams a chance? How do you see it playing out right now?
I have to think that geography is going to play a part in it. So I think, if you can have, if you've got games slated in your home state where you can potentially, travel by bus or something of that nature, rather than having to hop on a flight and travel, from, say, Chapel Hill to Stanford or something like that, I think that those games like that may be ones that end up hitting the chopping block. Now, I don't know. Again, we're still, a couple of months away almost, so maybe things change, maybe things get a little bit better. But I would think it's going to be something maybe similar to what college football did and say, okay, we're only going to play teams in our home state to try to mitigate, any kind of outside factors that you can in terms of COVID and contracting this virus and things like that. But I don't know. Again, I just don't know how health officials are going to be looking at things and seeing it in a couple of months. We've seen just things shift like this over the last 6 months, and what things work, what things don't. Do you contract it outside as much as you do inside? Does a mask help? Does a mask not help? So it's gone back and forth for months. Obviously, I think we've already moved to the longer conference season. We've moved to 20 games in conference, and you kind of touched on it that they want to see a certain amount of non-conference games, and you hope that those marquee matchups will still happen. If you are a smaller school, you're hoping that the North Carolinas, the Kentuckys, the Dukes of the world still play you, because you may need that game to get into the tournament. You may need that to say, hey, man, we had that big win, or we had that really close loss. That's a tournament building, game right there. On the other hand, like you said, if you are a North Carolina or somebody like that, do you need that mid-major game? You don't. So a lot of those schools that are getting paid for games and getting a couple $100,000 for a game, you're not going to see that kind of money coming in for them. If it's not, are they able to compete this year? I don't know. You look at teams like Long Beach State, for example. I remember a couple of years back when Long Beach State had some ridiculous non-conference schedule. It was like North Carolina, Kansas, Kentucky. I mean, they played like almost every blue blood. And I mean, that had to be $1 million, $2 million of money that they were getting, because I assume they were probably taking some money from those games. The smaller schools do. And, how do they operate without those incoming funds? I don't know.
Right. And yeah, there's so much that we don't know behind it that in normal years we don't even think about, like the pay games. And especially if your expenses are going up because you're having to do these testing, which is pretty expensive. And then these teams are saying, well, we can't afford to, not even afford to play you, but we don't want to risk, you guys having an outbreak and taking that to our gym or, whatever. It's going to be, there's so much that, of course, we're not doctors. We're not experts on COVID or anything like this. I feel like we got to say that every podcast now, but, and also we can't even predict what's going to happen a month or 2 months out, because like you said, it changes so much, almost even day to day. So let's jump into something else that you kind of mentioned here. North Carolina's football game this weekend against UNC Charlotte was just today, a couple hours, whatever it's been now, canceled because of, again, just as we're talking about, the smaller school, UNC Charlotte, even though they're not, I don't know how much smaller they are than Chapel Hill, but they're not, one of these even, Long Beach State or one of these really small schools has a COVID outbreak, or I haven't read how bad it is or whatever, but the game is canceled. So it affects North Carolina's schedule. They don't have a game this weekend. They're trying to fill their bye weekend, which is supposed to be the bye right before they get, into conference play and all of this. How much does the football schedule and what happens the next month affect kind of what what the season or schedules look like for basketball?
Man, I don't know. I really don't. I think obviously the more things that we see get canceled and postponed, and the more outbreaks and the more COVID cases we see, is probably not a good thing. However, I think that we've gotten to a point, and I think most people would agree, that we are becoming, right or wrong, somewhat desensitized to the whole thing. Let's look back a couple of months when the Big Ten is canceling everything, right? Prematurely, and I think irresponsibly, canceling everything. And I think that if nothing else, wait to make a decision. Don't make a decision on the, in the spur of the moment, and then a couple months later you come back and you're like, oh no, we're going to have football. Because let me ask you this, what has actually changed since they decided to cancel the season? In my mind, nothing.
Right.
And that's where I kind of, say that we've become desensitized, because I think people just want football. I think people just want normal life. And again, right or wrong, I just think it's a matter of we've been in the same sort of holding pattern for a long time. And I don't think anything's really changing. I think people are just like, screw it, I just want to see football. And I think the Big Ten had a lot of pressure from coaches and players and parents and fans. And I think they finally just folded to the pressure.
Well, the Ohio State quarterback even was almost on a rampage, right? Tweeting out how he wants to play, and that's not even in the South. You're in the Midwest more, but down here in the South, high school football. I mean, it's been crazy how people don't care. They just want their football, and especially I think now that they have a taste of the NFL going on. The high school season has started down here. Now we've had some college. And as good as I think the Big Ten kind of looked when they made that announcement early, as we're going to be the first ones, we're not going to play. How that reflects now, where they have to kind of backtrack, and of course they have things to kind of change. They say, "Oh, testing is getting better, testing is getting quicker, it's not as expensive." Again, things that we can't really check on or double check to see if it's right, but they have their kind of ways of getting in, but they just don't look good going back on their stance there. One other thing we've kind of mentioned, but I feel like we kind of should maybe get into a little bit more, is obviously basketball is different than football. It's inside, and we can do a little bit of a bubble. Football, that's just, it's not impossible. You play once a week. Basketball, we've talked about these early season tournaments happening, but even other bubbles happening in Orlando. I've heard of one in Mahogany Sun and up in Connecticut. I've heard of a tournament possibly coming to Nashville. We've mentioned Indy, Asheville, all these different places where you can get a weekend or even a full week into playing. You could play 4 or 5 games possibly in 1 week just to knock out some of those required games now, almost as it is, so that you're eligible for the tournament. This gives us more hope, I should say, or a better chance of getting those games in, right?
Certainly in those circumstances, yeah. But what do you do once, say a team, has 6 or 7 COVID cases, and then where does it go from there? Because then you miss 2 weeks of the season, because then you're looking at basically a 2-week quarantine. Well, if you've already missed, 2 weeks to start the season, and you've only got a schedule that's around 25 games, if you miss 2 weeks, you're missing a lot of games. So I guess that's where you're going to press up against that 13 game minimum. The real testament to that rule, and like what you said, let's see if the NCAA sticks with that, is what happens if Duke or Kentucky or North Carolina plays 12 games and they go 12-0? Are you really going to keep out one of your main draws to the NCAA tournament? I don't know that happens, and I bet the committee sees fit to make sure that team gets in now. I don't know, and let's hope that doesn't happen. But I do know that, if you miss any amount of time at all from December to February, to mid-February, you're going to be in a bad situation where you're missing games. And then when you're missing games, other teams are then missing games, because if you're slated to play, Notre Dame on a Sunday, Duke on a Wednesday, and, Clemson on a Saturday, all those teams miss their games, at least one game that week too. So there could be a complete domino effect. I don't know. Let's just hope that doesn't happen. Hope for the best. Hope that we make the safest, wisest, most responsible decisions possible, and that this season can get in.
Yeah, and so at the beginning of that, again, you mentioned something else. Something we didn't hear from yesterday is kind of the requirements, and we've kind of mentioned how obviously the bigger schools can test. I think North Carolina football is testing every day, or at least every day they practice now. The smaller schools can't do that, and the NCAA has said that they're going to have some kind of requirement to every school has to kind of live up how much they're being tested. And then, of course, once it gets to the tournament, the NCAA pays for that. But, how do we get that? And again, you mentioned it earlier, some of these schools may not be able to afford the testing that the NCAA is requiring. Do they just not play this year then? Or, what goes into that? Again, we don't know the answer, but does the NCAA, do they really uphold this requirement of certain amount of tests that you have to take or administer to the players and staff and all that? Is there a way that they can mandate that?
I think they can. I think they probably will. Now, the repercussions that has on those small schools, if some tiny school is being forced to put all this money into a program that's actually not making that much money, I don't know that they'll do it. I don't know that you'll see the small schools participating this year. I just don't know if you will. I certainly hope that for their sake that they're able to, but does it make a financially, sound decision to say, hey, we're going to, do this season at a, $250,000 loss. Probably not, especially not for basketball, because basketball is not ever going to be your big moneymaker. There's only a handful of schools, in the NCAA that make a ton of money off of basketball. And, even those schools, it's very, very tight with football. Even North Carolina that makes a ton of money off basketball, Kentucky, even Duke, I would argue probably makes more money in football than basketball, and their football team's basically trash. Football just makes more money, and basketball is not there financially. And if you're going to do it at a loss, I can't imagine a lot of these schools are going to do it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like we've been kind of all over this this podcast, so we might as well keep on going with that sense. As far as other information we do have, practices can start October 14th. And then, of course, there's how many hours that they can put in. So hopefully, at least in mid-October, we start to get a few more videos put out from the Tar Heels social media team and stuff, as far as videos. And I know we've seen a little bit of people working out, but that can start October 14th. Recruiting has been shut down for the rest of 2020, if not longer. Of course, they can extend that once it gets closer. So I know we had a comment here as we kind of close here. Grant Bowden says, can't wait for this season to start. Going to be a lot of good teams this year, including the Heels. Chet Holmgren's my cousin. Would love to see him Carolina Blue. Obviously, we can't get into recruiting on this podcast. There's just too much going on. And really such an unusual podcast. We haven't really talked about the Heels or how they're going to be. Obviously, we've mentioned them in all of this regulation and what's going to happen. But as far as what the NCAA has announced, have we missed anything? Anything else that you kind of need to say or want to say as far as what we kind of expect the season, not even the Tar Heel season, to look like this year?
No, I mean, I think we've kind of basically discussed the parameters of what's going to happen. I think it's going to be very fluid, and I think there's going to be different things that we'll see in here between now and then. But I think the general idea is what we've discussed. And I have to hope that doesn't change, because any changes that happen in that, I would assume, are probably not good changes. They're probably changes that have happened, that are pushing it back or making things tougher. So hopefully we get to stick with that start date. It's going to be an awesome Thanksgiving if we do. It's going to be like, Christmas and Thanksgiving wrapped into one, because we'll in theory, we'll have college basketball at least the day prior, maybe the day of Thanksgiving. We'll have football the same day. It's going to be amazing.
Right. Yeah. It's something we kind of jumped right into it and kind of glossed over, but people were talking about either November 21 or November 25. Well, the 21st is a Saturday, so it's going to be full of college football, and then you have NFL football the next day, and college basketball is just going to be, not even on the blip there. At least we get, Wednesday here, which, yeah, there may be some football on because it's the holidays, but it's almost the perfect day, right? The day before Thanksgiving. Just hopefully the TVs or the schedule is just full of college basketball. We can almost call it like the 24-hour marathon they used to have to start the season off. Hopefully we get just hours of college basketball. Of course, that's not the reasoning, according to the NCAA. That the reasoning they start on the 25th as opposed to the 21st is so many more kids will be off campus for the Thanksgiving break. But how many of these games are going to be played on campus to start? So many of them are going to be, like we kind of said, in bubbles and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. One other comment we did get before we close out here, it says, can't wait to see the season's team play. Looking forward to getting back to UNC winning ways. And hopefully this is something we can talk about next podcast. We need to get into kind of players' predictions and what we kind of see happening this season. So we'll probably have to have you back on again next month, Blake, to hopefully, again, like you said, we're not talking about stuff getting pushed back or other restrictions that are happening. Hopefully we can focus a little bit more about the Tar Heels and what we look the season to be like, as far as how play should be, how players, what we expect from players. I don't know. Right now, I feel like I'm just rambling here again. If you don't have anything else, Blake, I think we've covered it all.
Well, I'll say this: our friend that messaged in earlier and said that they're related to Chet Holmgren. They need to be in Chet's ear, because I don't think Chet's going to end up in Chapel Hill.
I didn't want to go there.
I think it's going to be tough to get him out of Minnesota, and if he does, I think he may end up in Spokane. But if you can chat with him and get him to come to the East Coast, we'd appreciate it. Yeah,
Grant, become his favorite cousin. Get him down there. Unfortunately, again, no recruiting. We can't bring him down to Chapel Hill and show him the campus and all that stuff. Like, especially the middle of the winter in Minnesota. Would be a perfect time to get him down Chapel Hill. But yeah, I don't know, Blake. Like I said, thanks for coming on. It's always good to have you and your knowledge. And obviously, people need to go to keepingitheel.com where you're throwing up all this information as it's going on, football and basketball. But yeah, hopefully you'll join us again next month, and we'll start to get into a little bit of the player expectations and more heel stuff related.
Sounds good. We'll see you next month.
All right, everybody, be safe and go Heels.